Okay, good day. I'm Jeff Warner. I'm a retired geologist, and for the past 25 years, an peace activist and analyst with a focus on Israel-Palestine. Thank you, Joseph, for inviting me to conduct this interview in which we will examine the Israel-Palestine Confederation and what we will refer to as the IPC. Let's start with you briefly introducing yourself.
All right, my name is Josef Avesar, and I am an Israeli American. I lived in America most of my life, but I was born in Israel. I went through the Israeli basic educational system, including the military. I immigrated to the United States at the age of 21. I studied political science and law, and I have been a lawyer since 1981. And I formed a organization called the Israeli Palestinian Confederation for the purpose of creating a federal government in Israel-Palestine.
Okay, so so that our audience understands, the basic outline of the Israel-Palestine Confederation is that it's an elected federal government with an elected president and an elected legislature that's an umbrella over the existing Israeli and Palestinian governments, and it seeks to work really in cooperation with those governments.
Well, it's not an umbrella. Umbrella implies that it is above the Israeli or the Palestinian government. The way we structured it, it gives a veto power to the Israeli and the Palestinian governments, the separate governments, if it passes legislation that violates those governments' sovereignty.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask questions in 4 sections. The first, I'm going to ask about the IPC and its structure. Second, we'll talk about what you expect the IPC to do to improve the lives of people living between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. Third, we're going to talk about how you envision bringing the IPC into existence as a political and social force in Israel-Palestine. And fourth, we're going to talk about what Americans and other non-Israelis, non-Palestinians outside the region can do to help make the IPC a reality. So let's start from the beginning. I gave a brief description of what the IPC is. Explain, you've been working on this for like 25 or 24 years. Why have you devoted your life to the IPC? Why do you think the IPC is something necessary to bring peace to Israel-Palestine?
I think that this formula, definitely, I think it's really the only way to bring peace. I am convinced of it. We have a failed. What we have here, Jeff, is a failure in humanity. This conflict of violence in Israel-Palestine is humanly created. It was created by human. It's not a natural disaster. It's not a earthquake or hurricane or whatever other natural disaster. It was created by human. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it has to be solved by humans. These humans that created the conflict over 100 years ago made a terrible mistake. And we are paying for it now, not only in Israel-Palestine, but worldwide. And it has to be resolved by human. And I think that federal government is the most realistic formula for it right now. because it does not call for the dismantling or the destruction of the Israeli or the Palestinian governments. It calls for the creation of a common sense, equal government for the people of Israel, Palestine. And in my opinion, that's the only thing that makes sense.
You said it was created by a terrible mistake. Elaborate on what that mistake was.
Well, the mistake was created by Zionism. Zionism was harmful to the Jewish people because and when I say harmful to the Jewish people, I mean it was harmful to them even before they started immigrating to Palestine, because it accepted the notion that Jews are not equal to non-Jews. And it basically dealt with anti-Semitism, and I'm speaking about Europe, about Theodor Herzl. Basically, instead of saying, we need to fight anti-Semitism, this is our country, whatever country it is, whether it's Russia or Poland, we belong to this country, we need to be treated as equal, and we need to be, to demand our equality. He basically accepted the notions that the Jews do not belong there and they need to go somewhere else. And he undermined the status of the Jews as equal people.
So the mistake was Herzl insisting on separation, that the Jews were not part of the rest of Europe.
Correct, that they are not part of their country. And that is harmful, was harmful to the Jews then, it is harmful to the Jews now. You know, American Jews think of themselves, most of them, I believe, as Americans who happen to be Jewish, that practice Judaism, but they are Americans. They are not, it is unacceptable for American Jews or European, or it should be unacceptable, I should say, that there will be an ideology that say, no, you don't really belong to that country, you belong somewhere else. So going back to your original question, telling the Jews to go somewhere else because anti-Semitism is there to stay forever was a huge mistake. And then going to Palestine and saying to the Palestinians, who were mostly Muslim, some were Christians, but mostly Muslim and Christians, we are coming back after 2,000 to 3,000 years, and we are now creating a Jewish state. That's inconsiderate, to say the least. I think it's narcissistic to tell people, hey, we are going to create a Jewish state, never mind your religion. Creating a Jewish state, even if there were no people over there, cannot be a democracy, because the idea of a Jewish state and democracy are oxymorons. But when you go there to people who lived there for many, many years and say, well, you know, we're going to disregard your religion, your identity, and we're creating a Jewish state, when they were tiny minority. That was the mistake that started, that's the human mistake that started this conflict. And it's going on until today. Not only is it going on, it's getting greater. And that's a human mistake that needs to be corrected. And Zionism, look, I was a Zionist. I was born in Israel. When you are born in Israel, you are by default a Zionist. And I believed in Zionism until I started to look into it. And I realized it's a narcissistic ideology.
Yeah, I agree. In English, when there are two nouns, one after another, the first one is really an adjective and the second one is a noun. And so that's why I always say Jewish Americans, meaning Americans who happen to be Jewish. And commonly in the United States, people say American Jews. That says you're primarily Jewish and happen to be an American. And I think that's wrong. And so I'm very careful to always say Jewish Americans. But the other phrase is always.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
Okay, so why don't you tell us the proposed structure of the IPC? How is this executive and legislature going to work, and how are they going to pass laws and things like that?
Well, it's a common government for the entire area from the river to the sea, including Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel, what is commonly people can refer to on the map. There are 14 million people in that area. They will elect, and we are not speaking about dismantling the Israeli or the Palestinian government. So if you're an Israeli, your government is the Israeli government. If you're a Palestinian, your government is the Palestinian government. If there are such, if they continue to exist. I'm speaking both the Israeli and the Palestinian. But we are speaking about, or I am speaking about, a federal government for the entire area of Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza that would be elected by the people, the 14 million people, with three branches of government: a legislative branch with 300 parliament members, representing 300 districts.
Excuse me for a minute. Hello? Hello? Yeah, let me give this to my wife. This is for her. Pat? Yeah. There's the phone. Yeah, I know.
I guess I can go on.
I apologize for that.
No problem, no problem.
Can we, I guess if you can maybe
Yeah.
start to improve the editing, you maybe should start this answer over again. And I think the question was, describe the proposed structure of the IPC and
Right.
different parts of the government and how it will function.
It will be a democracy, one government for the whole area. I'm not saying an exclusive government. I'm saying one federal legitimate government in the area of Israel, Palestine, from the river to the sea, for the 14 million people who reside in that area, with a legislative branch with 300 parliament members in the legislative branch, representing 300 districts. Each district will have approximately 47,000 people, and a executive branch, which means a president and a vice president, with one Palestinian as president, one Israeli rotating. The president will be for 2 years, the vice president for 2 years. They are rotating. Whoever gets the most number of votes will be president. Whoever gets the second number of votes of the other nationality would be vice president. And a judicial branch that would be appointed by the parliament. And in order for the legislative, and by the way, everything based on equality, Palestinians and Israelis together. In order for the legislative branch to pass legislation, it would require that 55% of the Palestinian parliament members in the parliament and 55% of the Israeli parliament members in the parliament will vote yes on the same legislation. And if the legislation violates the sovereignty of the Israeli or the Palestinian governments, then those governments will have a veto power against the legislation. If they do not exercise the veto, then it would be the law of the land of the entire area. That's in a nutshell what the idea is about.
So if there is an executive branch, the executive branch must do things. It has committees or organizations or agencies. To start, what would be the early agencies and tasks that the IPC would start by working on?
Well, it would be up to them. We are not proposing any policies for the federal government. We are proposing a system of government with a legislative, executive, and a judicial branch. Those people who will be elected, they will decide all the substantive issues, including committees, including the right of return, Jerusalem, any issue that you can think of or they can think of. But it's not going to be limited to the vision that is now being propagated upon us by the Israeli and the Palestinian governments. It will have its own vision. It will have its own thinking, not necessarily what the Israeli or the Palestinian governments think. It has a broad vision for the whole area with, Jeff, there isn't a single legitimate government in Israel-Palestine right now. There never was, because the Israeli government has never given the Palestinians the right to vote. It controls the Palestinians. The Palestinians has to obey the Israeli laws and the Israeli Supreme Court, but it was not participated in electing anyone from the Israeli government. They are under occupation, under apartheid. They are not allowed to vote. Palestinian governments have never given the Israeli the right to vote. There was never in the history a single legitimate government in Israel-Palestine. We are proposing a single legitimate government for the whole area based on a constitution, based on separation between government and religion, that would be equal to the entire area, and they will decide. The legislators who were elected by the people, they will decide what their policies will be.
You just mentioned the Constitution, and that was my next question. You've often spoken about how important it is that the IPC has a constitution and the Israeli government doesn't. And the Palestinians have a charter and stuff, but so explain why having a written constitution is so important. And while you're talking about the constitution, will the constitution set up any executive agencies for them to start working?
Well, it's important to have a constitution because the constitution sets the rules of the game. In order to be part of the government, there has to be the rules of the game. You can't change the rules during the game. This is what's going on in Israel because it doesn't have a constitution. The government that is in power constantly wants to change the rules of the games, and therefore it is falling apart within itself. But that's a separate. So anytime you do anything, if you you have to agree on what are the rules upon which we agree upon. We don't have to agree on everything, but there has to be fundamental agreement on basic issues, such as equal rights, such as separation between government and religion, such as due process, etc. So the federal government will have a constitution. The constitution has already been written. We've been writing this for the last 24 years and developing it. once you, and whenever we do simulations, I can tell you that we have Palestinians and Israelis, pro-Palestinians and pro-Israelis. They all accept the Constitution. It's easy to accept the Constitution when it speaks about values that are universal: justice, equal rights, due process, etc. Was your question about why Israel does not have a constitution?
No, no, no. Why the question was why the Constitution is so important. Why it's so important to have one, and I think you've answered that. I also asked, will there be any executive agencies defined or set up within the Constitution?
Well, the Constitution is written. It has, yeah, I mean, I don't know what you mean by executive. What was your executive what?
Agencies.
No, there aren't any executive agencies. That goes into more of the substantive policies. We want to keep it as broad as possible to let the parliament members have as much choice as possible.
Okay. You mentioned simulations, and we'll get to simulations in the fourth section where we talk about what people outside of Israel Palestine can do to help. But why don't you spend a minute or so talk, since you brought up the term simulation, what you mean by that, what the things are.
Well, we conduct simulations online, also in person, but not as many, where we ask the audience to act as if they are elected parliament members. We ask people in the audience to act as if they are Prime Minister of Israel. I think you were a Prime Minister of Israel many times, and
Yes.
Palestinian president. And we show how. Now we are not dictating to a future government their policies regarding issues such as the right of return, compensation, such as security, how to deal with checkpoints, how to expand joint economic zone, how to have a common police force, how to have a common airport and seaport, how to work together generally. So we are showing I'm acting as the president, and so that it's clear, I never intend to be the president of that government. I'm not even qualified under the Constitution because I'm not a resident of Israel or Palestine. I am a citizen, but I'm not a resident. We are asking the audience to act as if they are parliament representing specific districts. And then we propose legislation. Many of the legislations succeed very well because they are based on equality. And then once we go to we pass the legislation, we ask the audience to vote in the Zoom meeting. We ask them to vote as if they are parliament members, Israelis or Palestinian. And then we go to the separate Israeli government or the separate Palestinian government, and we say, are you going to veto this legislation? Yes or no? And we demonstrate that many times the Israeli and the Palestinian leaders or their governments will not veto legislation because it would benefit the people of Israel and Palestine, the legislation. It has a way to make peace, and it will be very difficult for them politically, internally and externally, meaning within the state of Israel, Palestine, or worldwide, to oppose or veto legislation. So we are actually showing how this federal government could work.
You want to mention that you have a special guest at each simulation?
Yeah, yes. We usually have special guests. It doesn't really matter their political views. Some are pro-Israeli policies, some are pro-Palestinian policies. We usually try to bring professors to those simulations, and we asked their opinions on what they see. We asked them to give their opinions on what it is that they see during the simulation.
Okay, thank you. Can you explain? We've talked about elections. Can you explain why elections will endow the IPC with legitimacy?
Because in a democracy, the government is supposed to serve the people. The people are choosing their government. So if you have an election, the government gets a license from the people to act on their behalf. If the government does not have the license, if there is no election, they don't have the license to act on their behalf, and therefore they do not have legitimacy. This is why I say that the government of Israel is not a legitimate government in Israel, Palestine, because it did not get a license to act from the Palestinian people. It only gets a license to act from the Israeli people. Now, if the Israeli government is restricting its activity only to the Israeli people, then yeah, they have legitimacy. But if they have their activities, their laws controlling the Palestinians who didn't give them a license, then they do not have legitimacy. Once the government gets legitimacy from the people, then it has the license to act for the people. So in a democracy, it's the government that is serving the people, not the people serving the government.
So you talk about serving the IPC serving the people. So what powers would the IPC have to act for the people?
Everything. It would be the legitimate government of the people, by the people, literally by the people, for the people. Just like any democracy. You know, for some reason, it behooves me, because when it comes to Israel Palestine, it's like we accept the notion that over there it's a completely different rules of the game, that the people of Israel and Palestine are born to be enemies and born to be acting in ways that are not it's okay for them, it's normal for them to act in a way that is not normal for other people. And I disagree with that notion. I think that the notion that a government gets its legitimacy from the people, and the people are the people who live there, doesn't matter their religion, it doesn't matter their ethnicity, the color of their skin, they get their legitimacy from the people, and they have to serve the people within the bounds of the structure that they accepted, which is based on the Constitution.
Okay, well, the last question about the structure of the IPC. How would the IPC interact with any entities or institutions that are set up in Gaza under the second phase of this Trump 20-point peace plan? Very soon there'll be, I suspect, a semi-Palestinian government of some sort, and there'll be some undefined as yet security force. How would the IPC interact with the some temporary government set up and a security force that might be international?
Well, the IPC, the Israeli Palestinian Confederation, will be elected by the entire population. They will all have the right to vote. They will elect, I believe in Gaza, you have 2.2 million people. That means that they will have somewhere between 40 to 50 parliament members in Gaza out of the 300, okay? These are people that are elected by the people of Gaza, if we have that, okay? So the whole government of the whole area will be responsible for the whole area, including Gaza. Now, if there is a force such as the Israeli force or the Hamas force or the American force or the international force, it doesn't matter. It will work with those forces as much as possible. But those forces do not have democratically legitimate existence. Their existence in that area is based on their military or physical force, but not legitimate force. So it would be in their interest to work with the IPC, because the IPC represents the people who elected them. So they will work together, demanding that the people of Gaza will be adequately served by those powers. We are not proposing, and I don't really think that the federal government will have military. It's not going to have enemies. It's the people themselves that want to be governed. So it's not going to have enemies. There are going to be forces there, the American, Turkish, the Egyptians, whatever, Israelis, but it will have to work with them based on cooperation with them, understanding that the people of Gaza are represented by the federal government.
Okay, well, let's try to move on to what the IPC will do for the people. The main issue that is in Israel-Palestine is that Israel and Palestine are immersed in a violent conflict. The 20-point peace plan is not going to change that. This conflict will be going on somewhere into the future. How can the IPC stop the violence and make peace? And why can't the Israeli government and the PA, Palestinian government, make peace without the IPC? How will the IPC help bring peace into this situation?
Well, the Israeli government is a Zionist government. They believe in the exclusivity of the Jewish people, of the Israeli people in the area. They do not believe in equality for the Palestinians. They do not, they are adversaries with each other. They do not believe in having a secular government for the entire area based on true democracy. The Palestinian governments believe the opposite of the Israeli government. Now, when you have these two entities in the same land, it's very difficult for entities, governmental entities, whether it is the PA or Hamas or Islamic Jihad, they have opposite views on how to manage that area. They do not believe in secular democracies, none of them. They do not believe in equality, and they do not have a constitution. They were never able to come up with a constitution because of those issues. So the federal government will have a completely different approach to that area. It's time to have that approach. And it will have its own vision, not based on what's good for one side or another, what's good for the Jews or the Muslim or the Christian. It will be 300 parliament members who happen to may have a different religion, many of them have no religion, but regardless, who swear allegiance to the Constitution and abandon their allegiances to any other government, who say, okay, we need to do what's good for the people. So they will have a fresh look at each and every subject, knowing that there are forces that they have to deal with. The forces are the Israeli government, the Palestinian governments, and all the other strong forces that are in the area. But none of those forces have legitimacy because they never given the right to vote to the people there. They've never been elected. So this would be a legitimate government that will have a fresh look at every issue. Palestinians and Israelis will sit together, looking at each other in the eyes, maybe yelling at each other, but at the end of the day, they will understand that they have the responsibility and the legitimacy and the expectations of their constituents to reach results, to give them results, not to just blame each other forever, but to reach results. And the mechanism of this federal government, so for example, let's say you are a parliament member from Gaza and another parliament member from Tel Aviv. They may have the same interest on a particular legislation. For example, the parliament member from Gaza wants to have his agriculture in his district being sent to Europe and America, flowers, etc. They're high tech, sent to Europe and America. Right now, they cannot do it. The same with the parliament member in Tel Aviv. He cannot, let's say he represents a cheese factory. Okay, there is a huge cheese factory right at the center of Tel Aviv, huge, but they are unable to sell their products to many countries because they wouldn't do business with Israel. So the parliament member from Gaza and the parliament member from Tel Aviv will happen to have the same interest, which is to create a mechanism where the Palestinian businessmen in Gaza and the Israeli businessmen in Tel Aviv will be able to sell their goods all over the world, and they may decide to have a joint airport, joint international airport, joint international seaport, all under the auspices, the control of the federal government. So we don't have to have the Israeli government taking control of it or the Palestinian government, but the common government, all of it in cooperation with the Israeli and the Palestinian governments. So the federal government will have a broad vision for the people and will be freed of these nationalistic ideologies that are part of what we discussed earlier, which is the human mistake that is going on for over 100 years.
Will the IPC have a police force, and how will that interact with the Israeli police force and the Palestinian police force?
Well, like I said earlier, the IPC will have its own ability to pass legislation regarding every issue, including a police force. But it makes sense that they will have a police force because they need to implement their legislation. They need to enforce their legislation, whatever legislation. So look, we have in America, we have each state has its own police force. Each city has its own police force. Some counties have police force, and we have a federal police force. And the federal police force has jurisdiction over federal issues. The city has jurisdiction, and the county and the state has jurisdiction. So why would there not be a police force that will have jurisdiction over legislation that the federal government passes? Otherwise, how could they implement their legislation? But all of it is going to be, the police force is going to be Israelis and Palestinians together. They will all have to swear allegiance to the Constitution. They'll have to abandon their allegiance to the Israeli or the Palestinian governments or their institutions.
So if the IPC manages to set up a free trade zone on the border of, let's say, Gaza and Israel, within the free trade zone, the police authority would be an IPC police force, even though that trade zone sits physically in Israel or physically in Palestine. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is one of the legislation we pass regularly in the Zoom simulation. I have visited that area many times. In fact, I'm going there again in November of this year. That area is a beautiful area. It's right on the Mediterranean. And it's a gorgeous area. It's just a beautiful area. Right now, it's a military zone. It's a military zone. You can sit there and look and with binoculars on Israeli military vehicles going back and forth. It's not meant to be that in that area. So let's assume that the federal government, the parliament members, to say, well, let's have that area turn into a joint economic zone with an international airport, with an international seaport, with universities, with education, with industry and agriculture, all common to the Palestinians and Israelis, that will increase the options, the employment for both Palestinians in Gaza and in Israel. It would be very difficult for the Israeli and the Palestinian governments to oppose that. Well, look, right now, as we speak, today is October 14, 2025, there is a huge problem in Gaza, huge, okay? How do we rebuild Gaza? A common federal government. If we had the election ended today, and we had a president elected today and parliament elected today, he could go all over the world and demand from all these countries all over the world to contribute to the rebuilding of Gaza and southern Israel, because he would be the only legitimate, he or she, I'm sorry, would be the only legitimate person that has been elected by the people of Gaza and Israel. It would be a game changer. And the people of Israel and Palestine do not have to live under this, what I call the primitive beliefs that we are doomed to be enemies forever. No, we can turn that area into an example of changing reality and changing terrible violence that has been going on into something that we can aspire to in the future, all of us together.
Well, that's a great goal, at which I share, of course, but there are two barriers to doing that. One is that the entire Israeli political class has shown itself to be opposed to peace. There was a legislation that the Israelis had a year ago, which the only people who voted against it were the Palestinian legislators. Even the Democratic Party, which is the reincarnation of Meretz and Labor, mostly voted for this legislation that said that the only rights in the land were Israeli. So anyway, the entire Israeli political class is opposed to peace, and they're backed, of course, by the U.S. government under the influence of the lobby. So the U.S. government gives full diplomatic, financial, and military support. And that's effectively frozen Israel's apartheid rule over the Palestinians in the West Bank, including ethnic cleansing, and sort of stands by with the genocide and starvation in Gaza. How can the IPC bring peace in the face of the Israel political class and the lobby?
Very simple. To have an election. If we have an election for a federal government, the Israeli political class or the liberal class or the political elite, or for that matter, the Palestinian political class or elite or the American, will not have a single legitimate argument against having a federal government for the people of Israel and Palestine. Once this election will actually take place, they will not be able to oppose it legitimately. They will not be able to, because they are failed governments. They have given death and destruction to their people of Israel and Palestine. So if we have, put yourself in any shoes you want, any person you want to, that you think may be in opposition to that, whether it's Netanyahu or whether it is Trump or whether it is Putin or a Palestinian political leader. And I've conducted many interviews with a lot of leaders. And I asked them at the bottom, okay, what is your opposition to this federal government? They all answer the same way. It's a wonderful idea. They all say it's a wonderful idea, but it's not going to happen. Why? Because they don't want it to happen. Because it would undermine their legitimacy. It would be in competition with them. So these people who have failed us for so many years, who have given us these solutions, all these ideas on how to resolve, who are a model of failure, all of a sudden are able to tell us what's going to work and what's not going to work. They're afraid of this. If we have an election and if we have participation, and that's, I don't know, maybe that leads to your next question, but those people are not the problem. They're not the problem. They're not going to be a player. They will just be watching this. They may be poo-pooing it. They may be ridiculing it. They may be doing whatever, but they cannot block it because the election will take place online. It will not take place one day. It will take place for at least 3 months. And under the Constitution, it will take place in perpetuity. In other words, the election will take place until each and every parliamentary district elects its representative. So it's not going to have a deadline until each and every district elects its representative. So the people that you mentioned are not going to be effective. Well, they probably could, like I said, ridicule this and try to motivate their people. But there are enough reasonable Palestinians and Israelis who will form so let's say, in my opinion, if we have an election and we have a fair opportunity to implement the election and to show the people of Palestine and Israel the failure of their government and the benefit of this federal government, in my opinion, we could have between 4 to 5 million people voting and 300 parliament members voting, being elected. And those people that are against it or are pretending to be in favor of it will have no choice but to go along with it at the end of the day.
Okay. The Palestinians have suffered under Israeli rule in one way or another, and there are really two root causes of Palestinian suffering. One is the 1948 refugee crisis. The Nakba remains unresolved. And the second is that Israel occupies Palestinian territory with an apartheid-like regime that causes Palestinians immense individual and group suffering and financial ruin. How would the IPC address the occupation, address the refugee issue, and sort of work to end the occupation?
All right, you're absolutely right. We are in 2025, 77, 78 years past the Nakba, past the expulsion of 750,000 Palestinians from their land. And let's be clear, that issue has been ignored. That is at the heart of the conflict. This is why the Palestinians are unable to trust the government of Israel. And the Israeli government and most people, Israeli people, choose to ignore it as if it didn't exist. Okay, it's like, it's never mentioned. If you go to Israeli schools and study the conflict, they will mention to you each and every brave operation that the Israeli soldiers before the IDF and after the IDF have conducted. They will barely mention, if at all, the expulsion of the Palestinians, and they will not mention that it was designed by the Zionists and that they were refused re-entry to their homes. This is the heart, as far as I'm concerned, this is the heart of the problem. And from that, like I said at the beginning, it's a human mistake. You know, Israel always said, Abba Eban used to say, the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Well, that's really what the Israelis have done. They had an opportunity, a golden opportunity, to create a democracy, because the Palestinians would not have had would have accepted at the end of the day a democracy equal to everyone. So that's the Israelis who missed the opportunity in 1947, 1940. But going back to your question, the only entity that could legitimately, honestly face that issue is a federal government. And I'm talking about the expulsion, and I'm talking about the refugees, and I'm talking about land grabbing. All of these issues are the federal government will be the only entity that could face that issue, because Palestinians will be equal in the government, and they will insist, and rightly so, that they are not going forward unless that issue is being resolved. The Israeli government is incapable of facing that issue or resolving it. By the way, the Palestinian governments have not been able to resolve that issue. this would be a democratically elected government, and the people of Israel and Palestine will demand that their parliament members will deal with that issue. Now, how do they deal with the issue? There are many, many ways to do that. And by the way, we deal with that in our simulations, specifically with that. So if a parliament member, an Israeli parliament member, Palestinian parliament members who swore allegiance to the Constitution would say, okay, we have agreed that in order for us to pass legislation, 55% of the Palestinian parliament members and 55% of the Israeli parliament members vote. So we need vote the same way on that legislation. So we need a consensus. We also have agreed that we give the Israeli and the Palestinian governments a veto power over the legislation. What does it mean? It means that with regard to each and every issue that we just raised, the expulsion of the Palestinians, the refugees, the land grabbing, the occupation, the apartheid, all of the major issues will have to be dealt with in such a way that both the Palestinian and the Israeli parliament members who are sitting in the parliament will agree to that, and the Israeli and the Palestinian governments will have no choice but to accept that legislation. And there is such a way, on each and every issue. Mostly the best way to do it is partial right of return, compensation, a combination of partial right of return and compensation on all issues, including land grabbing. But it will be up to them. It's not me, Joseph, who will decide those issues. And some of these issues, it may take years to resolve, but at least there will be a mechanism to resolve it in a fair, equal, and honest way.
Those are big challenges.
I don't really think so. I really don't think that they are such big challenges. We have been taught to believe, because we live we've been taught to believe that Israelis and Palestinians are unreasonable people. They are enemies for good. And we see everything in the constellation that has been imposed on us. It has been imposed on us. We have never sat together as human beings, as equal, with the legitimacy and the responsibility. And you're reflecting what we were taught to believe. But the reality, I think, will be a lot different, because these people that will be elected will be good people who want to resolve the issues. They will be reasonable people. Because in order to be elected, you have to be reasonable, good person. And they will be able to work it out very quickly, in my opinion. I may be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but no, I hope I'm
I
right.
hope you're right.
Yeah, sorry. I hope you're wrong.
Okay, well, let's pass on to bringing the IPC into existence as a political and social force in Israel-Palestine. The key to making the IPC a reality is for there to be millions of people voting in an IPC election. What is the plan to make that happen?
Well, it's an incremental plan. It's not, look, we need funding. We need funding to have the platform for the election. And we need funding to encourage Palestinians and Israeli parliament members and candidates for parliament and candidates for president and vice president, and we need funding to make the people of Israel and Palestine aware of that election and aware of the of the benefit of this federal government and their failure of their own government.
Okay, so there's really two parts to that. The easy part is the funding for the platform. The platform, you're talking about some kind of a web scheme for voting that's secure and safe and things like that. And that's really very straightforward. It just takes a certain amount of money and a little bit of work. But the second issue, the education, to educate the people that there is, to make them aware that there is an election coming up and what the election could do and why it would be good for them and so on and so forth. That's a much bigger job. And so how do you propose doing that? You talk about $100 million.
Correct. $100 million is necessary. That $100 million is a drop in the bucket, by the way, if you compare it to the billions and billions of dollars that have been spent on the violence itself. Billions, would be hundreds, probably hundreds of billions of dollars.
Well, yeah, the U.S. alone has given $250 billion worth of arms. Just the United States, not counting France and everybody else.
So, first of all, I don't want to challenge you, but I will. Why is it that the idea of getting $100 million for peace is so difficult, but the idea of spending billions of dollars is on war, on killing people and destroying their homes is acceptable, is part of, we're not challenging that. But I'll answer your question. What we need is what we first need is international awareness. That's why I asked you to do the podcast. That's why I'm going to ask other people to do, and that's why we have the simulations. That's why we have the meetings that are going to be in Israel, Palestine. The media is refusing, in my opinion, to have an honest discussion, fair, honest discussion on Israel, Palestine. And I can cite you an example if you want.
Please.
All right. We have a strong supporter by the name of Lawrence Wilkerson.
Know who he is.
For the audience, he used to be
Colin Powell's.
Colin Powell.
Colin Powell's assistant.
Chief of Staff.
Chief of Staff.
Okay. Chief of Staff is usually the person that is most trusted by the principal. So the Chief of Staff of the President of the United States, someone you go through in order to get to the United States. Chief of Staff of the Secretary of State is someone you go through in order to get to the Secretary of State. He was his Chief of Staff. He is a strong supporter of the IPC. He was a guest in our IPC simulation. And he's also participated as a legislator. And he wrote an op-ed with me to publish in the New York Times. Now, as a ex-chief of staff, the New York Times, I'm sure, paid attention to his op-ed, but they refused to publish it. Several months later, they had like a 2-page spread in the New York Times about options for peace in the Middle East. And they published by many well-known people, One of them was Yossi Beilin, and his partner and other people. But they did not publish his article. As far as I remember, this is my memory, all of these ideas that were presented in the New York Times, and don't quote me on that, I may be mistaken, had to do with a two-state solution, even for a federation based on a two-state solution. And I wrote an article about it, and I said the New York Times puts his two fingers on the scale of peace in Israel-Palestine because it refused to publish his article. I can tell you I sent hundreds of letters, emails to the media. We had a full-page ad in the New York Times about an election for Israeli Palestinian Confederation that took place on December 12, 2012. We had a quarter-page ad in the New York Times recently, maybe a year ago or so, about the IPC. We had a quarter-page ad in the Washington Post. We regularly sent emails to over, I think, 250 journalists. Not a single one contacted us, as far as I know, to write an article about it. I think there was one person who became a supporter. He wrote in Arabiya, I believe. I don't remember the name. But that's about it. Now here you have a war that is going on that is engaging the whole world, and you see it 24/7 on television, and you see a genocide, and violence beyond description, and not a single article or not a single honest discussion about peace, not inviting to have a honest discussion about peace. What does it tell you about the media? It tells me that they are guilty of journalism malpractice, that they are not interested in peace. Maybe it's beyond their imagination. Maybe they are being taught to believe that peace is not possible, which is even worse because of the profound prejudice against the people there.
Well, I don't think that's why the media doesn't talk about it. The media it basically reinforces the establishment. And because the establishment doesn't talk about the IPC, the media doesn't. If establishment people would talk about the IPC, the media would. So it's the media just reflects the establishment. The real problem is the establishment, the elite.
Okay, you may be right. I don't know. We have a person who is a supporter. His name is Emmanuel Shahab. He lives in Israel. He used to work for the Israeli prime minister in the prime minister office. And he voices exact same frustration as I do about the media.
And it's not just that. I mean, the media, when you deal in politics in the United States, the media just reflects the establishment. It doesn't have basic principles that it tries to discuss or to understand in general.
Well, but look, now that you mention it, I also disagree with you. I listen to NPR, and every once in a while they bring a person who either Israeli or Palestinian to talk about what's going on over there, and then eventually the question of peace comes up, and inevitably they talk about a two-state solution. But they don't really get deeper into the issue of other mechanism. They choose the people to interview. Well, maybe you're right. I have to think about what you're saying. You may be right. They choose the people that reflect their the general beliefs in society, I guess.
Well, the establishment believes that the only solution is a two-state solution. And so when NPR wants to talk about peace, they only talk about the two-state solution. They're reflecting the establishment. Anyway, let's go on. The IPC will be viewed by, or may be viewed by Israel and the PA as a threat to their own power. The Israel elite is now in charge, and if you bring the IPC in, will dilute their influence to some extent. So they're going to consider it as a threat. They may object to elections. They may, even to the extent of interference or blatantly closing or hacking the IPC election website. They may restrict travel for IPC officials or candidates. They can create all sorts of mischief. How will the IPC counter the threats when it is just getting up and running?
Well, I've been asked that question many times. The IPC will create a conundrum for them. If there is if it starts getting some traction, they probably would say, if we oppose it openly, then it's going to expose us as unreasonable, meaning us. So if the Israeli or the Palestinian government they're going to think, in my opinion, that opposing it would expose them to the public realizing that they are incapable of making peace. So in all likelihood, in my opinion, at the beginning, they're going to say, well, let's just ignore it because it doesn't make sense. The people are not going to buy into it, et cetera, et cetera. Once it gets more traction, you're right. There may be some intentional hacking and other activities against it, but all of it would be a blessing in disguise because it would promote the IPC. It would force a discussion on the issue. So if we have a person now in Israel or Palestine that the government of Israel or the Palestinian government would say, well, we need to arrest you because you are undermining our government, or you are a threat to our government, that would be a blessing in disguise for the IPC, because they will have to prove, they will have to deal with their own failure, and they will have to prove their claim against that person. And it would generate public interest. And they would not be able to prove that the federal government undermines their government, or is or is trying to disrupt or a subversive organization, because it recognizes the governments of Israel and Palestine, and in fact giving them a veto power. So it would be very difficult for them. Now, they may be able to disrupt the election, and that's another reason why we say the election will take as long as necessary. But look, the country of Estonia conducts election online, and I think 40% of the public there vote online. We do banking online. We do many government activities online. So there are ways to secure it, I think. But let's wait and see. Your question was brought about 500 years ago when someone suggested a democracy. And a similar question came up. How can we have a democracy when the king has all the horses and he has all the soldiers, and he can prevent us from making a living and do harm to us? And there was no internet at that time. There were no cameras. There was no social media at the time, but they were able to figure it out. So it's really, in my opinion, it's a technical question that could be overcome.
Okay, thank you. The final section we want to talk about, and the final question is, what can Americans and other people outside of the region do to help make the IPC a reality?
Many things. First of all, come to our simulations. You can sign up at ipconfederation.org and ask questions. You know, we call it a simulation because we want to show how it works. So come to our simulation. Write to your media, and if you are part of the media, I challenge you not to commit media malpractice. Think about, why is there no peace in Israel-Palestine? If you can just write on that issue. Are we here to believe that Palestinians and Israel are so incapable of making peace? And by the way, for some reason, when it comes to weapons or medicine or technology, the Israelis and the Palestinians are so advanced, but when it comes to democracy or peace, we somehow think of them as a rooster that are designed to fight each other forever. So that one issue that you can write about, either to your journalists or to reporters that you know, or to the media that you know, expand the conversation on that issue, come to the simulation. You can also contribute to our, but you know, the financial contribution is not that important to us. What's important to us is awareness, media awareness. That would bring, that would bring the public to be interested in asking those questions that you just asked.
Well, okay, I thank you very much. We've now gone over an hour, and I think that is well within our time. So I thank you very much for inviting me and having this discussion. And I hope that this gets wide distribution, because as you say, the most important thing is to make people aware, and hopefully this discussion will help in that endeavor.
Yeah, let me just plug in the next simulation. We have one on October 26th with Ahmed Al-Samiri. He is a Palestinian from Gaza who now lives in the Netherlands. He left Gaza, I believe, in 2022, just before October 7th. And then on November 23rd, we have a simulation with Matt Duss, who used to be advisor to Bernie Sanders. And we'll ask him those questions. And then I'm going to be in Israel, Palestine in November, meeting with a lot of people. one thing I would like to add, if you don't mind, I'm going to meet with, it relates to one of your questions that you asked. I'm going to meet with a person who from organization called Zochot. Zochot in Hebrew is remember, but it's for female. You know, in Hebrew you have male and female, so but they have a lot of men in that organization, as far as I'm concerned. They conduct a tour of the Palestinian villages that have been eradicated in 1947, 1948. And I think it's extremely important to remember, to lizko what has been done, because it is extremely important to face that issue. Like I said, the federal government will be the only entity that could face that issue. So I'm really looking forward to having that tour with him. I'm going to be meeting with many, many people all over Israel, Palestine. But I'm particularly looking forward to that tour.
Good. Well, thank you very much, and I wish you luck on that tour. And I will keep attending the simulations, and I hope they become much larger. There's many, many more people will join them as we go down the road.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff. You've been a great supporter. You always agree to act as if you are Israeli Prime Minister, even though your personal views are opposite the Israeli Prime Minister. But you took that role very well, and you really demonstrated very well. I appreciated that, because you acted as if you are Netanyahu, and that demonstrated to the people the political consideration that the prime minister will have to have when there is a legislation that is supported by the federal government. So you did a great job. I really appreciated it. In fact, sometimes I'm embarrassed to call you because I feel that I'm imposing on you, but I'm very appreciative of that.
Thank you. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. I'll stop the recording, and all right.